This Sunday, France will decide its next president. The incumbent arch-neoliberal Emmanuel Macron is up against the far-right racist Marine Le Pen. It's a rerun of the previous contest in 2017. Back then, Macron trounced Le Pen, receiving 66% to her 33% of the vote. But this year, it's set to be much closer. In head-to-head polls at the time of the first round, that was 2 weeks ago, Macron was only beating Le Pen by 52 to 48%. That gap has widened as the second round approaches, but not by much. As it stands, Macron is on 55% to Le Pen's 45%. So Macron is the favourite. But whatever happens on Sunday, it's clear the current appeal of the far right in France is unprecedented. And that's pretty terrifying. Because Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party is really, really right-wing. Originally called the National Front, the party was founded in 1972 by Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine's father. Jean-Marie said things like this: "Tomorrow, immigrants will stay with you, eat your soup and sleep with your wife, your daughter, or your son." And this: "I ask myself several questions. I'm not saying the gas chambers didn't exist. I haven't seen them myself. I haven't particularly studied the question, but I believe it's just a detail in the history of World War II." So really disgusting, despicable stuff. After inheriting the party in 2011, Marine tried to distance herself from the anti-Semitism of her father, but she hasn't been averse to racist analyses invoking World War II. In 2010, she said, "I'm sorry, but some people are very fond of talking about the Second World War and about the occupation. So let's talk about occupation, because that is what is happening here. There are no tanks, no soldiers, but it is still an occupation and it weighs on people." The so-called occupiers being compared to Nazis by Marine are French Muslims who dared to pray in the street. And Le Pen has kept up her Islamophobia. If elected, she has pledged to ban women wearing headscarves anywhere in public. This is how she justified that policy in this week's presidential debate.
I believe in banning hijab in public areas. I cannot state this any clearer. I do believe that headscarves, hijab, is a uniform that is imposed on women by Islamists. And a lot of young women who wear it have no other way. They may not dare say it, but they are forced to wear it because they're isolated. Because otherwise they would be insulted, attacked, harassed, because they are being sidelined and accused of being impure. I believe that is the term. Such a situation is unacceptable in our country.
Marine Le Pen is, of course, very far from an expert on what Muslim women want, which is why almost none of them vote for her. And it's pretty clear that headscarf bans, rather than headscarves themselves, are what really threaten to isolate Muslim women. Le Pen has also followed her father in whipping up fear about migrants. She has pledged to hold a referendum to amend the 1952 constitution so that it's no longer forbidden to discriminate in workplaces based on country of origin. In the debate with Macron, she explained what she'd be proposing people vote for.
And I'm calling upon the entire population to check out my website and read that text, because it would include deporting foreign criminals and felons, removing birthright citizenship. French citizenship should be earned. You shouldn't get it automatically. And also maintaining national preference for French people when it comes to housing allowances, housing, low-income housing. In particular, businesses should give French workers or French recruits priority when they're trying to recruit people.
You'll note those policies are not all unlike what our government endorses over here. For example, Britain can already strip people of citizenship if they're found to have broken laws. But there is still a difference between Johnson and Le Pen. He doesn't openly talk about the Great Replacement. To understand National Rally's approach to immigration, it's worth returning to Marine's father, Jean-Marie. This is him speaking to Newsnight in 2016.
Si j'arrivais au pouvoir, j'avertirais le monde en disant, écoutez, je connais vos difficultés, vos problèmes, je sais la misère qui est la vôtre, mais moi, mon job à moi, c'est de défendre les Français, d'abord, chez eux, dans leur territoire. Alors je vous avertis, ne venez pas chez nous Parce que si vous venez chez nous, vous n'aurez aucun droit. Vous n'aurez pas droit au logement. Vous n'aurez pas droit au travail, puisqu'il n'y en a pas. Vous n'aurez pas droit non plus à l'école pour vos enfants. Vous n'aurez pas droit à l'aide sociale.
I think that clip is instructive as to what has and hasn't changed in the transition from Jean-Marie to his daughter. Under Jean-Marie, the foreign-born will have no rights. Under Marine, they'll just have fewer rights. It may seem more palatable to the electorate or the media class, but it's still based on asserting racial supremacy. Yet despite these continuities between Marine and her father, she has had success in projecting herself as far from the extremes. In part, that can be blamed on the media. For example, in Britain, her run has been covered like this. Marine Le Pen passes professional cat breeding diploma, but insists it's not backup career. Then it says, dubbed cat mother, Ms. Le Pen hopes to become the first French president to bring her 6 cats with her to the Élysée Palace. You might have been able to guess that was the Telegraph. But her success has also been because her competitors have helped shift French politics even further to the right. In the first round of the presidential election, Marine Le Pen faced 2 rivals who ran on ethno-nationalist platforms. Eric Zemmour was so right-wing as to make her appear moderate, and the candidate of the centre-right, Valérie Pécresse, endorsed the Great Replacement theory, which contends that a shadow elite are colluding to replace white Europeans. But perhaps most significant of all, and why I don't envy the French this weekend, is that the normalization of racism has often come from the government of Macron. His higher education secretary has complained that Islamo-leftism is plaguing the entire society. I am going to call for an investigation into all the currents of research on these subjects in the universities so we can distinguish proper academic research from activism and opinion. Islamo-leftivism, that is really, really the language of the far right there. His government have also targeted Muslims with legislation. In 2021, a so-called anti-separatism law was passed. It was designed to target what the government call Islamist separatism. Macron said it was necessary to, quote, free Islam in France from foreign influences. It included granting greater rights to the state to police places of worship, more control over sports and cultural clubs, and greater oversight of schooling. And it also extended the headscarf ban, which already existed for public servants, to private employees contracted by public bodies. However, when it comes to the normalization of Islamophobia by the French government, there is no better example than this. This is France's Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, debating Le Pen last year.
Madame Le Pen, dans sa stratégie de dédiabolisation, on vient à être quasiment un peu dans la mollesse. Je vous trouve, faut vous reprendre des vitamines. Vous n'êtes pas assez dur, je trouve, là. Si je comprends bien, ne même pas légiférer sur les cultes et vous dites que l'islam n'est même pas un problème. Vraiment, vous êtes parti assez loin, ça va décevoir beaucoup de vos électeurs, j'imagine.
Oui, monsieur
les frères musulmans.
Je vous confirme que je n'entends pas m'attaquer à l'islam, qui est une religion comme une autre, et auquel, parce que je suis profondément attaché à nos valeurs françaises, je souhaite leur conserver la liberté totale d'organisation et la liberté totale de culte. Voilà, ça c'est mon opinion. En revanche, l'islamisme est une idéologie que l'on doit et que l'on peut combattre. Et vous
That's right, Macron's minister doesn't think Le Pen is racist enough.
Le Pen has been around for a long time. Her father's been around for a long time. You just obviously made that very clear. I think it's a great little explanation of what's happening. But these ideas as well, from what's been called the New Right in France, have been percolating since the 1960s. This is a very organized, extensive political project. And some of the most influential ideologues coming out of the New Right, Alain de Benoist, Guillaume Fay, Renaud Camus, I think, was the actual guy who came up with the idea of the Great Replacement. These are intellectuals driving this stuff, and that's before you get into sort of more popular thinkers. So it is concerning. And in a way, it's quite different to Britain, Michael, because we've not had a radical right doing that kind of intellectual heavy lifting. You see glimpses of it, like Douglas Murray, but it's not really a thing here. You know, the right was so transfixed with the free market agenda of Margaret Thatcher and Thatcherism all the way through, I think, to Brexit. I think that's what Brexit offers, was a rupture for the conservative movement in this country. Now conservatives The smart ones, I don't agree with them, but the ones who think about things are now thinking about a post-liberal conservative politics, which is what the sort of French New Right's been doing since the 1960s, the 1970s. So it's a really distinct political culture that they're dealing with over there. And like you say, they don't have a brilliant choice. I should be clear here. I would want everybody to vote for Macron against Le Pen. But Macron and the genre of politics he's offering isn't really a response. It's a dam which has already been breached. And that's clear from Le Pen's numbers over the last decade. What we see in France, I think, is quite similar to what we see in Italy after 1990, which is the complete collapse of the political mainstream. Macron has benefited from that too, right? Macron is this guy who comes out of nowhere with this new political formation, this new party, and he becomes the president. But actually, the historic centre-right has fallen away. The historic centre-left, the Socialist Parti Socialiste, has collapsed, got less than 2% in the first round with their candidate, the Paris mayor, Anne Hidalgo. You're seeing the kind of collapse of mainstream politics in France. The intellectual heavy lifting done by the new right is really coming to fruition, not just with Le Pen, but with other candidates too, like Pécresse, Zemmour. And those people make her more credible. And I think the real concern, and I think Macron will win, famous last words, but I think the real concern is what happens to French politics after Macron. Because right now he is filling a political vacuum. That's the nature of Macronism, is he's filled a political vacuum. And I think it's very concerning about who succeeds him in filling that vacuum. I should say, we should also be somewhat optimistic about the prospects of the French left, because you had Jean-Luc Mélenchon almost finish in the final two. I think Le Pen ultimately finished 1.5 percentage points above him. You have elections, I believe, later this year. And the emphasis now is really on electing as many progressive, socialists, radical social democrat, green legislators as possible. And if that doesn't happen, if people take their eye off the ball after a hopefully Macron victory this weekend, then it's very plausible that the French far right comes back even stronger. So the battle for the soul of the French nation is not going to be finished this time next week. It is very much still up for grabs. And that's very much the case for the European far right. The growth model of the late 20th century, early 21st century has gone. We are going to see a mass transformation in demographics, aging demographics, a change in ethnic and racial complexion in Europe. These are all huge sociological facts. They are happening. At the same time that living standards stagnate, you have to have a responsive politics to that. The idea that you're just going to have centrists, managerial, technocratic politics, it's not technocratic because they don't actually solve problems, but they call themselves technocrats. The idea that's going to be the long-term solution to this, very misplaced. And in a way, I'll finish with this, you sort of see that with Macron and what he's proposing. He's saying things, and I don't support Macron, but he's saying things, rhetorically at least, which were unthinkable even 5 years ago. He's talking more about energy self-sufficiency for France, agricultural self-sufficiency, channeling a certain quasi-social democratic politics that's also aligned with the centre-right and Gaullism of, patrie and French national sovereignty, which kind of goes beyond partisan politics in France. And I think Mélenchon is right to try and grasp that too. But the idea that sort of neoliberal centrism is the long-term response to this, that opens the gate for the next time.
When Trump, Brexit, Corbyn, when those three things happened, everyone was talking about how weak and struggling liberalism was and talking about what is driving populism, all of these sort of difficult questions being asked about the liberal centre. Now, they obviously managed to destroy Corbyn. Brexit happened and the world didn't collapse, and Trump's gone. Everyone on the centre thought, okay, emergency over, we can go back to normal. Like you saw some signs in the United States of Joe Biden, potentially sort of the shock of Trump had forced him into offering a policy platform that was much more ambitious than your normal Democrat historically. But now you've got log jams in Congress and that's all gone out the window. It feels like everyone has just completely forgotten that actually something is fundamentally broken in liberalism. And in most of the West, there's 45% of the population or more who are willing to vote for something which is, well, in the case of Trump or Le Pen, incredibly reactionary. But in any case, it's a vote which is expressing a sort of really broad dissatisfaction with what is going on right now with the current status quo. And I just feel like, there was a moment when everyone thought, this is a big deal. We have to deal with this. And then everyone's like, oh, no, safe. It's back in the box. And now Marine Le Pen's like, oh, maybe it's out of the box again.
Yeah.
And it also, it ties in with I suppose, the celebratory attitudes that we've seen when it comes to Ukraine. Like people saying, Ukraine shows the West is back. And it's like, well, the West's response has only been united because Joe Biden happens to be in the White House. He's the least popular president ever at this point in time. And he's probably going to be replaced, if polls are to be believed, by Donald Trump in 2 years' time. So for you to be saying, the West is back, this is a new era of purpose for liberalism. I mean, it just, to me, seems completely myopic.
Delusional. And it's gone past the point of sort of attacking and admonishing these people as somebody from the left, because that's their history. They are history. And I'm not sort of being hyperbolic and saying, the left is, on the move. And the left is in a bad place in many countries as well. But they have big problems. What I would say, Michael, is slight correction. I think the North American establishment, the US establishment specifically, I think they take the threat of Trump very seriously. And I think they realize how close they came. And I think many of them are willing to change the politics and the way that the country is administered quite significantly. At least rhetorically, people that previously hated free markets. Take Francis Fukuyama. Look, we had him on Downstream not long ago. And people probably think, why is Aaron Bastani, a socialist, a Marxist, talking to Francis Fukuyama? But what was clear to me was that somebody like Francis Fukuyama comes from the neoconservative movement, thought the market was always right 10 years ago. What Trump has basically taught him is, we carry on like that, we're done, right? Because what that's led to is stagnating living standards, 40 million Americans on food stamps. The American dream is dead. That has major political downsides for us. People who like to live our lives and sell our books and be the academics and go on TV, have friends who are in politics and do well in business. The patrician center intelligentsia, they recognize that's gone. And so they're making certain concessions. Okay, organized labor should have a little bit more of the pie. Maybe natural monopolies. Maybe there should be public ownership. Yeah, there is a role for the state in innovation. So people like Fukuyama, Bill Gates, and so on are saying things that I don't agree with them. They're still well to the right of me and you, Michael. But I think that the Trump experience has moved the dial on the American establishment significantly. Not enough. I agree with you, not enough. I don't think they realize the scale of the problem. And it's easy to not realize it when you're living in your multi-million-pound apartment and you're living in your relatively insulated political, cultural community. But I think something has changed. Those people have learned more lessons from Trump than their sort of analogous communities in the UK have learned from Brexit. For sure. I think for sure, Michael. I think lots of people look at Boris Johnson, they think Corbyn's gone, Boris Johnson will go, and then we'll get like Rory Stewart or Keir Starmer and it'll be like the 1990s again. I think that's more of a problem, and it's not, by the way. Blairism with zero growth is going to be a very ugly political project. I mean, I don't even know how it works. I don't even think Tony Blair knows how it works. Those people think we'll go back to the 1990s. Well, we can't go back to the 1990s. Because when New Labour came in 1997, the average house price was 4.5 times the average salary. Now it's 9.5, 10 times the average salary. So we're not going to get growth from inflated house prices. We're not going to get cheap consumer durables because of a cheap Chinese labour market. That's gone too. Cheap energy's gone. So, where's your growth model? Financialization? We're going to grow the City of London again? Have, pumping our graduates into Royal Bank of Scotland and ABN AMRO and all these banks which no longer exist or are tiny compared to 2007. So I think the American establishment's a little bit better on this than the UK. But I agree with you. They even now, Michael, it's 14 years after the global financial crisis, there isn't a structural analysis of what has happened. Look, if you have interminably into the future stagnant living standards, people feeling that they're poorer than their parents, and that's a majority experience for societies, UK, US, much of Europe, other countries too, by the way, right? We talk about lost decade, plural, increasingly, lost decades. Yes, UK, yes, Italy, but also countries like Brazil, also countries like South Africa. It's dawning on them, but I think it's probably going to take another 10 years before they say, you know what, okay, universal basic services and a Green New Deal, let's do it. I think we're probably going to have to see a lot more success coming from the far right before they get on that train, sadly. Because it's not in their rational self-interest to do that, or they don't perceive it to be, right? They want to make lots of money, pay little tax. They want to see permanent asset inflation for their housing and their stocks and their shares. Increasingly, they do understand the political downside, but not enough. So yes, France, I'm actually quite optimistic about France, I have to say, in the long term. I think Mélenchon, he's really surprised me. I'm not optimistic about Italy. I'm not optimistic about a lot of countries in Europe. And you're right, it's puzzling. But I think actually, like I say, I'll finish on this, what I said earlier, the worst ones of all are the British Liberals. I have no idea where they get their conclusions from. They will somehow have some Blairite restoration. If they can explain it to me, great. Right now, nobody can.